Canada's Open Data Exchange was born out of the need to increase the discovery and commercialization of open data across Canada. From day one, we knew that we needed to focus on improving the entire data supply chain, from consumers to suppliers. With that in mind, we traveled across Canada in early 2017 to meet with the businesses and municipalities creating value from open data. Our goal was to use the best practices we learned during this tour to create a blueprint on how to successfully implement open data strategies. We uncovered a great deal from our discussions, and we're excited to share some of the highlights from these interviews.
Open data was actually initiated by our City Council. There was a notice of motion that was raised directing our senior administration to pursue a means of being able to provide information/data to our citizens in an open and free and machine-readable format.
It started with a small group of people just bouncing this idea of, like, if we start releasing open data, is there interest from the community to consume, create more data, aggregated data services, and maybe get some economic benefit out of the whole program.
The beginnings of open data at Winnipeg were really sort of, I guess, what you would call grassroots. They were people who were within the organization who were passionate about open data, and they were able to sort of make a case to their individual units or groups about what the case would be. We started, in my experience, with open data at Transit, and the building block there, what started it off, was the fact that we realized that the apps were coming. This was back in the early days when it was iPhone, BlackBerry, and Android, and we were saying, well, we're going to have to face this reality, but we didn't really have the resources to start creating apps for 3 different platforms that we weren't familiar with. And so we said, well, what if we just put our data out there and let other people make apps? And it seemed like a really workable solution, because we already had an internal platform for sharing that data, and we simply just exposed that to the public, and it turned out to be a really big success.
The notion of transparency is an important one to consider for local government, and not unlike other organizations, Strathcona County was interested in becoming a player in open data.
Initially, we started with an open data advisory group. Once the policy was in place, we created an open data advisory group with members from the open data team for sure, but also from all the business areas within the city. So we kind of identified like data stewards from each business area, and we invited them as part of the open data advisory group. That's how it started.
The biggest element in that whole strategy going forward was identifying the various data stewards throughout the corporation. It's the data stewards that we needed to engage and have that face-to-face conversation with those respective individuals, and promote the initiative and the good of what open data is going to be doing for the city as a whole and its respective community that it represents, as well as what's driving the initiative. And it was certainly a global initiative that was driving open data, and we wanted to be a part of that ride.
We wanted to make sure we empower our citizens to understand the city operation, why the city is making a certain decision. We're making the information available so people understand if their elected officials is really doing what they said originally in their campaign. Here are the voting record to illustrate that, whether they're voting aligning with their campaign.
We're always talking about our data sets. We'd love to have businesses get involved. Anytime we see anybody seeking data sets for the purpose of creating an app or maybe an a website or something like that, Andrew reaches out to those folks and tries to get them the data sets that they're looking for. We had last year somebody created an application called Know Your Zone, which basically told you where you can and can't park your vehicle in the winter when there's a snow clearance going on. And so we've reached out to this individual. We wanted to see if there was any additional attributes that he would like to see in the data set that he uses to make it even more powerful. So that's a very good example of where somebody from the public went out and used our data to create something that could be usable by the citizens.
We put together a sort of a policy framework and just a matrix rating system for looking at the data and seeing, you know, okay, who's it going to be valuable to, how valuable is it going to be. We look at the opinions of the people who know the data best, you know, as in the people who are responsible for that data. We look at the opinions of people from the outside who may have a different perspective on what's the value of that data to somebody else. We're looking to set up a committee where other people can be involved in that process. And then we also take a look at the other side of things, the cost side of things, because in certain data sets are very trivial to expose. So back to that transit example, that was a relatively short thing for us to do because we already had an internal API for sharing that data internally. Other data sets can be very challenging to expose, and so there's a cost-benefit thing to look at there.
The overall vision we have regarding information technology and open data enablement, it's about driving the key things that matter to our councillors. Constituent growth, economic development for the businesses in our city, and the successful and prosperous relationships we have interprovincially, internationally, and those key soft elements like tourism that make our city better. So for us, it's from a budgetary standpoint, it's being able to show that information technology, open data, these are the enablers of these things. Open data is the blood that makes all these systems function well.
Some of the ways that we feel will be successful are, one way is getting all business units on board. We currently have just roughly about half the business units of the city providing data sets. We want to see all of them provide a data set or so of quality value. We were not about quantity, getting all types of data sets out there. We're more focused on the types of data that are meaningful, that can influence decision making. So that's one of the ways that we're focusing is on business units. Another one is engagement is huge. You can't just build it and hope they will come. Building this portal, you have to reach out to the business community, to council, to employees, to citizens, and really get them engaged and get their feedback on what they would find valuable. Employees at the City of Calgary are a huge consumer of data, and we can, by opening up this data, we can really drive efficiency in the city because here are some tools and visualizations that are available in our portal that can save a lot of people time and money, as well as consolidating the information so you don't have 3 or 5 different locations for the data and you don't know which one's up to date, but here you have one-stop kind of shopping for the data that everybody knows this is the most up-to-date data that they can use for their analysis, decision-making, or predictive and prescriptive analysis.
Actually, I got a phone call from someone in the signage department for City of Winnipeg, involved with branding essentially, and she's like, how do you make a heat map with data on the open data portal? All right, I'll come down and show you. Her theory was that people were parking in these places because there wasn't enough signage. She was able to find a list of all the parking spots, make a heat map on her own, and then now she'll be able to see if the additional signage she's put up has actually reduced the number of parking tickets in those areas. So can you imagine doing something like that without the data on the open data portal? I mean, calling the parking department, say, I need a heat map of it would just never would have happened.
When we release all the GTFS or the transit real-time data out to the world for the Googles and the Apples and Transit app to consume, we have formal and or informal agreements with each of these companies that, hey, if you're consuming it for commercial purpose, let's at least have an agreement with us so that you make us aware of your changes and vice versa.
We've reached out to Red River College and they're integrating our data sets into their coursework. We're also planning on doing a fall hackathon. We tried to do one in March, but we had some issues internally that we couldn't accommodate. We're also going to do a training session, and in that session we'd like to include the media as well as the developer community. After all, the media can use our data sets.
through an external committee of practice on open data, we've been in touch with different stakeholders and practitioners across the province, and we're looking at ways to share each other's data because we see the benefit of that. And case in point, I mean, we have an Alberta Open Data Portals data set on our portal that Edmonton has taken up to federate, and because there's no need for them to duplicate what we have. It's a way of, regardless of which platform you're on or which portal you're browsing, you're able to access the information. That, I think, will help people search for data that they need and not have to go through 10 or 20 or 30 different portals.
The City of Edmonton believes that being transparent is the way of a modern municipality, that open data is the way where you can held accountable and you can show that you are actually delivering the services and the programs that you promised to the citizens and prove through by releasing the data on an open data portal.
Open data becomes a catalyst with respect to the new economy. And lots of people talk about the new economy. And the new economy will not get to a level where it's going to be fruitful without the mechanisms to which open data can provide the community as a whole.
This is the city's data, and they should have access to it in some form to do with as they wish.
Open data allows a real direct relationship with the constituents and businesses that drive the economic growth of your city.